So this brings us to, we need to do a risk assessment. And we need to identify each of these devices, where the problems might lie, shortcomings are, what we can do to try to patch these holes. So in conducting this risk assessment, we need to bring your own device policy. This is what Dan was talking about. We need to make sure that our employees understand what their responsibilities are and if we're allowing those devices on our network. So again, this is great for productivity if I don't have to carry 3 phones for, one for each job or whatever I've got going on, or 2 phones. If I can only use 1 device, that's great, but that also opens me up to a lot of issues if I'm a practice owner, because all of a sudden my nurses have information that's going to their private device. I don't have necessarily direct control of that device at all times, so it's important to have that device policy in place. It can be up to the point of, and my actually bring your own device policy, we state that we can actually erase your phone. I think that's a good place to be, because if the phone is lost, you want to be able to say, let's wipe that device. And this also applies to tablets, and also can apply to laptop machines. But you want to be able to control those as much as possible. And in that policy also, you will talk about things like making sure that family members aren't allowed to use these devices in off hours. You're going to look at making sure that password protection is on, that you're changing those passwords, allowing biometric use. So for the iPhone, it's very nice to be able to use your thumbprint to access the phone, but making sure that that is turned on at all times, that the device is encrypted. If you're using Android or Windows phones, you need to make sure you actually turn on encryption. I will warn you before you do that, make sure you back up those phones and devices, and do stop that when it's starting the encryption process. If you do stop the encryption process halfway through, it will basically boot your phone, and you will have to restart from scratch, and you will not be able to access any information. You'll lose everything that you had. So just make sure that when you do that, that you probably do it overnight and just let it run overnight. So really think about these items. And it's very important that you have this codified, and that you have your employees sign off on this. So with that, we want to talk about also having a mobile device management plan. We want to be able to track these devices. We want to know what information is being accessed. This is where sometimes file sharing programs can be really helpful, because that information will stay on those file sharing applications, like a Citrix file share. Sukasa has a really nice platform for that. It goes over Dropbox, yes, Dropbox is not HIPAA compliant, by the way. If anybody's using that, they need to stop that. Box has a really nice web app, and that's nice thing about that is you could designate control. So you can say, hey, Bob stopped working for me. He quit yesterday. Let me deny him access to patient files that were in this box file. So you can turn those controls on and off, which is very helpful. So, but you want to be able to manage those devices. You can either do that through like an Apple, like the Apple Find My iPhone. Android has that. Windows has a program like that. If you're looking for something more in the enterprise level, there's a program called Prey, P-R-E-Y, that allows you to track devices and will also allow you to lock those down. You're going to definitely want a mobile device encryption plan. About encryption, and I'm going to throw in a lot of stuff here, and and I'll try to keep this moving as fast as possible, but there's a lot of information to cover when it comes to mobile devices. When it comes to encrypting your mobile devices, if you're dealing with say an Android phone, Windows phone, or Android tablets, you have to make sure that when you turn on that encryption that you're also encrypt those SD cards. Those SD cards are not normally encrypted, but you want to make sure that they are, because if you're putting any information on that card and you then take that card out, that's free game. You want to make sure that encryption is on those cards in case any PHI gets there. Also, if you decide to pass off any of these devices to your kids or to other family members, make sure you securely wipe those devices. And we've talked about this a few times, the password policy. We want to make sure those passwords are difficult. We want to make sure that getting into those devices, it's not 1, 2, 3, 4. Really make sure you're using difficult passwords. They should be at least 6 to 8 characters to get in. special characters if you can. I know a lot of these are just digits when it comes to like an iPhone or whatever. Biometrics are great, thumbprints are fine, but just make sure that those are activated and those are constantly on. It should be every time a person turns on that device. If it's going to contain PHI, you want that mobile device to basically every time somebody tries to access that phone, they have to either use their thumbprint or use a password to get in. So you also want to consider these questions. Can the devices leave the office? Most of them leave in our pocket every day. Also think about if you're using flash drives. I would recommend people start to migrate away from those flash drives, any sort of removable media for general use. I think this is where a cloud storage solution like a Sukasa, a Box, Citrix ShareFile becomes very helpful, or accessing maybe the EHR through a encrypted portal through either a VPN, that's a virtual private network, or using a secure socket layer, which is SSL, or HTTPS, that's Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. That's what that little green lock looks like up in your upper left-hand corner when you're looking at a browser. So, you want to try to control that data as much as possible because that is your job. And so controlling that data means maybe keeping it on your server, keeping it in the cloud, and not letting people download that information onto those devices. So what operating systems are you guys using? You want to make sure those are updated constantly. So if you're using Windows 7, make sure you're doing those security updates. Windows XP no longer is usable. They're no longer doing updates on those. You need to make sure that you're phasing those computers out. And as the security updates come, make sure you're pushing those right away. Do save documents with PHI require encryption? I would say they do. It's up to you as you do your risk assessment to make that decision, but I will tell you I've yet to see somebody, and I've done a lot of compliance plans, where I've seen an instance where something should not be encrypted. So yes. Do you regularly scan your systems for malware? I hope that the answer to that question is yes. We're going to talk a little bit more about some specific examples of this that have been coming up recently, but you want to make sure you're updating your malware constantly, that it's scanning for those for families of viruses, and that you have something that scans anytime you plug in any sort of devices. That's your flash drives, your mobile devices. You want to make sure you're trying to keep malware off as much as possible. And also, when it comes to those email encryptions, and make sure you're training your staff to say, hey, if we see a unexpected attachment or something that looks weird, not to open those emails, not to open those attachments. Does your email encryption software require authentication of the correct receiving party? This is very important. There are a couple encrypted programs that will encrypt at point-to-point, but once it gets to the supposed user, that email is automatically unlocked, and there's no authentication that happens. You really want to make sure that the receiver is authenticating who they are, because many people share devices at home. You want to make sure that Bob's getting that information and not Bob's son or his wife or whatever. Just he may allow that information to go to his wife, but let him make that decision versus just sending it blindly to that person. That goes back to that, making sure that email is encrypted. But yes, they should have to authenticate who they are.